So this is going to be a review on chapter 14, which is about how to calculate the value and cost of carrying inventory. So there's basically four things we're going to be talking about here: how to value inventory, which there's three methods, and how to calculate the cost of carrying inventory, which is really easy. So there are three ways we can kind of value how much inventory we have or have been sold or stuff like that. The average value method, the first in, first out method, which is also called FIFO, first in, first out, and last in, first out, which is LIFO. These last two methods are usually used when you've sold inventory. This right here is just usually used to take stock of your current inventory if you just want to get a number for it or whatnot. So let's go through each method here. So the average value. So when business buys items to sell, usually the cost of those items fluctuate depending on when they buy them, especially if they're really seasonal, like fruit or produce. So to find out how much your inventory is worth or its cost is kind of a little bit difficult if you have items that cost you different amounts, but they're the same amount. Like if you bought, let's say these are, avocados or something, or snails in this case. So a restaurant buys snails to use in their dishes or whatever. Well, on January they bought 20 snails for $3 each. Well, in February they only bought 15, and the cost went up to $4, probably because that's why they bought less. And then in March they bought 30, but the cost is only $2. So if I want to figure out, okay, what's the value of their inventory? Well, that's a little bit, again, difficult to calculate, so we use something called the average value. Because, again, you have two snails, which theoretically are the same, but they cost you different amounts. So what you do is you take your number of units and you add them all up. So in this case, we add up all these, we got 65 total. Then we figure out how much all this costs together. So 20 times 3 would be 60. So we're multiplying across here, okay? We're multiplying this way. 15 times 4 would also be 60, and 30 times 2 would also be 60, which was not intentional. I just realized that all these came out to be 60. That's my bad there, but it works out for us anyway. So this would be $180. Right? So if I want the average value, what I do is I take, it's 180, not 186. I'm going to take my total cost and divide it by my total number of units. And that will get me the average cost for these items. So if I take 180 and divide it by 65, I get $2.77, we'll say. $2.77. So on average, my snails that I have currently in this restaurant cost $2.77 each. Now, is that true that they all cost $2.77 each? No. Some cost more, some cost less, but on average, each snail cost you $2.77. So if you want to make a profit, you better sell these snails for more than $2.77 because then you're going to make more money on average. So again, that's why this is important to businesses, that they know, okay, I have this inventory I want to sell. I want to make sure I sell it at a profit. So what would be the amount I could sell it for and still make a profit? Obviously, they could say, well, the biggest cost me was $4. So I'm going to sell all my snails for $5 each, but that might be too much. Nobody wants to buy them anymore. So you have to kind of figure out, okay, what's the average cost of my inventory, and then how much more can I price it up to make a profit when I sell these snails? So again, average value is very important because that's going to be one of the dictators as to how a business sells its items. Now, after they've sold some items, they have to take stock again because, again, their average value might have changed now. Because if you sell some items, that's going to change. If I sell some of these snails, that's going to change this number, and it's going to change this number. So one way to calculate that is using the first in, first out method, which basically says that when you sell items, you're going to sell the oldest item first. So the items that you get first, those are what are you going to sell first. This is usually used a lot in produce because our produce or food, because you want to sell the oldest food first so it doesn't go bad. So what we do here is we simply take how much we sold, subtract it off of our inventory, and then recalculate. So here's how that works. Okay. So a restaurant sells 30 snails using the first in, first out method. What's the value of the inventory that we sold, and what is the value of the inventory that remains? Okay, not average value, but actual value. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to refill this table here. So this is going to be, actually, you know what? Let's keep it like this because we actually don't need to refill it. So let's do part A first. The value of the inventory sold. Well, we sold 30 snails. First in, first out, which means we're going to sell the oldest snails first. That means we're going to start in January. That's the oldest month here, right? Well, if I want to sell 30 snails, that means I'm going to sell all of these 20. So all of these 20 snails are going to go. and they cost me $3 each. So 20 times 3, right? Now, I need to sell 30, right? Which means I need to sell 10 more. Well, here I have 15 snails. So I'm only going to sell 10 of these. So I'm going to sell 10, but keep 5, right? Sell 10, but keep 5. So I'm going to sell 10 more snails that each cost me $4 each. So do some quick math here. That'd be 60. That'd be 40. You add these together, and you get $100. So that's what you sold that inventory for. You sold that inventory for, or that's how much that inventory cost you. My bad. So you sold inventory that cost you $100 to get. So hopefully you sold it for more than $100 in total. So that's the value of the inventory that you sold. You sold these first 20 snails, and then you sold 10 of these 15 snails for a total of 30 snails sold. Now part B says, okay, what's the value of that of what remains? Well, that means you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to base it off what remains. So in this case, 5 snails remain for February. So 5 of the February snails remain, 5 times 4. And then all 30 of the March snails remain, because we haven't sold any of those yet. Which means if I do this here, there's 20, that's 60, add them together, and we get $80. So I have $80 of inventory left. Or at least the inventory that I have left cost me $80. So hopefully when I sell these, I'm going to sell it for more than $80, which means maybe I can lower the price now. Maybe I can lower the price from $277 to maybe $250 or something like that, and then still make a profit if I need to get the inventory out quickly, right? So again, always ask yourself which ones are you trying to find, or if you're trying to find both. Are you trying to find the value of the inventory that you sold? This is often said as the cost of goods sold. That's another way of phrasing that. The cost of goods sold is the value of the inventory you sell. The cost of goods remaining is the value of the inventory that you still have. So always ask yourself which one you want to find. Usually it's part A, but it could be both. And then make sure you do the correct calculations. And again, you simply work from the top down, from the oldest month to the newest month. You keep subtracting items until you've sold all the items that you need to sell, and then whatever remains goes for the second answer. Now, last in, first out, LIFO, is the same thing except you go in reverse. You sell it from the most recent item you bought. So this would be like, if you're selling gravel or something like that. If you have a bunch of gravel you want to sell, you just kind of put it in one big bucket and you sell it as you need to, and therefore the most recent gravel that you put in the bucket is the one that gets sold first. So it's not as common as first in, first out, I don't believe. Again, I don't know for sure. I haven't done any stats on that. But usually first in, first out is the more common way businesses do the stuff. But last in, first out does have its place. So again, first in, first out, we kind of went from top down, right? Well, last in, first out, all we do is we go from bottom up. So we're going to sell from the bottom all the way to the oldest month instead of going from the oldest month down to the most recent month. So same deal. This time we're going to sell 40 snails using last in, first out. We want the cost of goods sold and the cost of goods remaining. Okay, another way of phrasing those questions. So 40 snails, last in, first out, which means I'm going to sell the most recent snails first. So March. Well, if I want to sell 40, I'm going to sell all of these 30 snails. So all of those 30 snails times $2. And then I'm going to sell 10 of these snails, right? So I'm going to sell 10 of these snails. I'm going to keep 5 of them, because again, I want to sell 40 total. So 10 of these at $4 each. This would be what here? This would be 60. This would be 40. So in total here, I have 100. Which again, was not intentional. I did not make it so that it comes up the exact same thing as it was last time. Sometimes these might be the same. Sometimes they might be different. Just depends on the problem you get. I just was picking numbers that I thought would be easy to work with. I didn't realize that they'd be too easy to work with. So, and then to find the value of the inventory remaining, again, we do the same thing. This is what we sold. This is what remains, right? So we're going to take our 5 remaining snails at $4 each, and our 20 remaining snails at $3 each, which is these right here. These are what remains. We get 20, 60, which when added together gives you 80. Right? So this ended up being the same thing as it was last time, but it does not always have to be. If you do last in, first out versus first in, first out, sometimes you do have different answers for these. Okay, I just picked numbers that were a bit too nice. Okay? And when you're doing your table, it might help what to mark with an S and an R what you sell and what remains. That way you keep straight which one goes where. So 30 bucks or 30 snails I sold, 10 snails I sold, 5 snails were left, 20 snails were left. So the R's get used for part B, that's what remains. The S's get used for part A, that's what you sold. Right? For some reason my wrist is off here, which is why I'm not able to write that well, but that's neither here nor there. So last in, first out, first in, first out, very similar methods. It's just depending on which direction you go. And like I said, if you're not selling anything, that's when you use the average value. So the average value is, okay, I'm looking at my inventory. Maybe I haven't sold anything here in a while. I want to see about a price change. So I'm going to look at my inventory and simply take stock of everything and get an average cost. So notice in the average value, I had to do a division, whereas the other ones I didn't. And then I can determine what to do from there. Okay? So average value is what you use when you're not selling anything in the problem. You're just kind of looking at the inventory and just taking stock. Whereas first in, first out, and last in, first out are what you use when you're actually selling items and you want to figure out, okay, what remains after selling some number of values. And then maintenance. So if you're carrying inventory, that usually costs you some amount of money to maintain. Like for example, if you're carrying food, you have to make sure you pay for a refrigerator to keep it cold if it needs to be cold, or storage materials if you want to store it in like a container or whatnot. It has to be a certain temperature or in a certain place, that sort of thing. So all those costs can add up. There's also things like insurance and taxes on what you have in terms of inventory, what you have in possession. So the maintenance cost is usually, or the cost of maintaining goods, or the cost of carrying goods is another way to phrase it. So this could be called the cost of carrying, the cost of maintaining, that sort of thing. The way you get that is you take the value of the items you have and you times it by a certain percentage. That's usually how people or businesses express the cost of their goods, is by a percent of their value. So what businesses will do is they'll keep track of what the costs were to maintain their inventory for past years, and they average those out into a percentage. So that percentage is usually given to you. But again, this is based on past data is how they get this percentage here. So it's kind of an estimate. It's not an exact science, it's an estimate. So for example, Dunder Mifflin here keeps $150,000 worth of inventory. If it costs them 40% on average to maintain it, what's the actual cost of maintaining the inventory? So they have $150,000 worth of inventory, right? It's going to cost them 40% of that amount to simply maintain it. So we're going to times that by 0.4. And we get what we have. So 150,000 times 0.4. And we get 60,000. 60,000. So it's going to cost them $60,000 to simply maintain that inventory based on past data. Now maybe they had a really good year this year and they've really upped their systems and really cut down on waste, and maybe the percentage is going to be less. But on average, that's why it says here, on average, based on past data, it costs them about 40% of the value of inventory to maintain it. Now, sometimes you can do this backwards. Sometimes it says, okay, well this year, maybe some, or this year, some other year, they had $70,000 worth of inventory, and it only cost them 30,000 bucks to maintain it. So what was the cost of carrying the inventory, or the percentage? So we're going to take $70,000, which was the amount of money we have, or the amount of inventory we have, and divide it by 30,000 bucks, which is the cost of carrying that inventory, and we figure out the percentage. Now, actually, we're going to be doing this backwards because I wrote my numbers backwards, so that's my bad. These need to be reversed. So 30,000 bucks goes on top. My bad here, folks. There we go. So 30,000 bucks would go on top because that's the cost of maintaining it. 70,000 bucks would go on bottom. So the value of the inventory you have, that goes on bottom. The cost to maintain it, that goes on top, and that will get you your percentage. So if we do 30,000, 1, 2, 3, divided by 70,000, which is the same thing as 3 divided by 70, 3 divided by 7, we get 0.4285, so we'll say that's 0.43. All right, we'll do 429. So 42.9%. Right? Just change it to a percentage. So this year, it cost them 42.9% of the cost of inventory, or the value of inventory to maintain it, which is pretty close to their average of this year, right? So in this case, they were a little bit above their average cost, but not by much. So when you're maintaining inventory, it's usually just a simple multiply or division problem. If you want to figure out the cost of maintaining inventory, you simply multiply it by the percentage. If you want to figure out the percentage that it costs you, you simply divide it and to figure out that percentage like we did in the second one there. So once again, if there's any questions on this, please let me know. Otherwise, like I said, that was kind of it for chapter 14. We didn't spend too much time on it. It was mainly just for figuring out, how to assess your inventory. That way, chapter 15 makes sense when we do stuff like markup and markdown. So if you have any questions on this, let me know. Otherwise, as always, please enjoy your day, night, evening, or whenever you're viewing this, or not viewing it, I guess.